It started with a blocked garage. It ended with a secret tunnel, stolen HOA funds, and Eleanor's house collapsing, literally. But it's what I found under her floorboards that changed everything. You won't believe what I found under her house, I whispered, my voice echoing through the narrow tunnel as I held my flashlight toward a dusty wooden box labeled in thick black marker, Agnes Confidential, HOA use only. My heart pounded as I realized I was beneath the queen of the neighborhood herself. But let's rewind, because this entire mess started with nothing more than a blocked garage. When I moved into this so-called peaceful suburb, I thought I was upgrading my life. The houses were lined up like chess pieces, lawns perfectly trimmed, and neighbors waved like they were auditioning for a commercial. It looked like heaven, but I didn't realize I was moving into a gated community run by Satan's middle manager, Eleanor. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-appointed president of the Homeowners Association, and she took her power way too seriously. She was the kind of person who measured your grass with a ruler, reported you for leaving your trash can out 5 minutes too long, and called the city if your Christmas lights didn't come down by January 2nd. I tried to stay under the radar, keep the lawn neat, smile when she walked by, play the game. But everything changed the first time she blocked my garage. I had just returned from a grocery run, car loaded with milk, eggs, and a trunk full of screaming toddlers, my kids. I turned onto my driveway and came to a screeching halt. Eleanor's massive SUV, decorated with an HOA logo magnet, was parked across my garage like she owned the cement beneath it. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe she had an emergency, or maybe she'd only be there for a minute. Nope. She strutted out of her house, sipping iced tea, looked me in the eye, and said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were home. I'll move it later." I tried contacting the rest of the HOA board, only to learn that the board had been restructured and Eleanor now operated as a temporary emergency chairperson due to COVID bylaw extensions. In simpler terms, she had all the power and no one else wanted to deal with her. I was stuck. Things escalated faster than I expected. One morning, I woke up to find bright orange cones in front of my garage, accompanied by a laminated sign that read, "Temporary Construction Zone. No parking or access." I blinked at it like I was dreaming. I walked next door, knocked politely, and Eleanor opened the door with a wide smile that somehow felt like a slap to the face. "Oh, I forgot to mention, we're installing fiber in the neighborhood. Your driveway is the easiest access point." I asked why the construction workers weren't there, and she replied, "Well, there's been a slight delay. Should only be a few weeks. Thanks for your patience." There was no construction, not a shovel, not a truck, not a single contractor. Just Eleanor using HOA jargon to claim dominion over my property. I called the city. They had no records of any fiber installation in the area. I brought that up with Eleanor, and she shrugged. "I guess someone made a mistake on the permits," she said with the smugness of a Disney villain halfway through her monologue. At this point, I had two choices, accept that I was living under HOA dictatorship or fight back. Naturally, I chose the second, but nothing worked. Legal advice was too expensive. Petitions? The few neighbors I asked nodded sympathetically but refused to sign. Most were either scared of Eleanor or secretly on her side. One guy even whispered, "She got my fence replaced for free. I'm not crossing her." That's when I realized the HOA was less of an association and more of a cult. One night, after yet another long walk from my car parked 3 blocks away, I vented to my uncle on a video call. He's a retired mining engineer, a quirky old guy who once helped build underground storage for the military. I told him the whole story, expecting sympathy. Instead, he laughed and said, "Sounds like you need a secret tunnel, kiddo. Go under her, pop up on the other side like a gopher." We both chuckled, but the idea planted itself in my brain like a weed. At first, it was a joke, then a fantasy, and then a plan. The very next day, I started researching tunneling techniques. How to dig without disturbing the surface, how to reinforce soil, how to avoid gas lines and water pipes. It was insane. It was also the most thrilling thing I'd done in years. That night, I measured my backyard and calculated the distance between my shed and the far side of my garage, approximately 47 feet. If I angled correctly, I could bypass the driveway completely and emerge in my backyard from beneath my own house. I told no one, not my wife, not my kids, not even Uncle Tunnel. I began casually buying supplies, shovels, pickaxes, ventilation tubing. I labeled everything as landscape project so the receipts wouldn't raise eyebrows. I transformed my backyard shed into a fake workshop with tarps and privacy fencing. Every night after the kids went to bed, I'd slip outside, climb into the shed, and dig. The dirt was heavy, the work was brutal. But each time I broke new ground, I imagined Eleanor's face when I showed up in my backyard, fresh from a trip to the grocery store, having bypassed her idiotic blockade entirely. That image kept me going. That, and the deep, primal satisfaction of doing something ridiculous, rebellious, and borderline illegal, all for the sake of freedom. But freedom was just the beginning. Because down there, beneath the crust of suburbia, I was about to uncover something far darker than blocked driveways or fake construction zones. Something Eleanor had buried, literally. And that's when things stopped being about revenge and became something much bigger. Every night, the dirt pile behind my shed grew a little taller, and the tunnel crept a little deeper. At first, I was just focused on getting around Eleanor's blockade. I had no grand plan beyond digging my own secret driveway beneath her nonsense. But something happens when you spend a lot of time underground. It changes your perspective. There's a weird kind of peace in the dirt, quiet, still, like the world above doesn't matter anymore. Down there, I wasn't just a guy fighting an HOA tyrant. I was a man reclaiming his freedom one scoop at a time. I quickly learned that tunneling wasn't as simple as digging a hole and crawling through it. I had to worry about collapse, water seepage, and airflow. I spent hours watching DIY bunker videos and studying old mining techniques. I reinforced the sides with beams I salvaged from an abandoned fence 2 streets over. I laid down plywood planks so I wouldn't sink into the mud on rainy nights. Every tool had to be quiet, no drills or jackhammers, just me, a shovel, and an absurd amount of determination. Despite all the planning, I nearly gave up on day 9. I hit something hard, something that didn't belong in the soil. My first thought was a rock, maybe a pipe. But after clearing away the dirt, I found the edge of a thick slab, concrete, flat, and about 2 feet wide. I thought it might be a utility trench from the original development. My second thought, of course, was that I'd hit a septic tank and was moments away from an unforgettable smell. But the surface was dry and oddly smooth. It didn't look like part of a system. It looked like a hidden floor. I debated for hours whether I should dig around it or through it. Curiosity won. I scraped and chipped at the edge with a crowbar until a chunk broke off. A cold draft blew into my face from the hole, followed by the unmistakable scent of stale air. Not sewage, not gas, something old. I widened the hole enough to shine my flashlight through and peered down. What I saw didn't make sense. Beneath me was an empty crawl space, maybe 4 feet deep, with wooden beams and insulation. The tunnel hadn't just crossed into her property. It had punched directly under Eleanor's house. For a moment, I panicked. This was trespassing on a level I couldn't talk my way out of. If she found out, if anyone found out, I was cooked. But the adrenaline had its own logic. I reasoned that I wasn't hurting anything. I hadn't broken into her home. I was under it. Technically. Sort of. Not really. But also, yeah, totally. My morals twisted in the dirt like the roots around me. I climbed through the gap and stood in the crawl space. It was bigger than I expected, with just enough room to hunch over and move around. My flashlight cut through thick cobwebs and dust clouds. The beams above creaked with the weight of the house, and I could hear faint footsteps from above. Eleanor, pacing, probably yelling at a neighbor for owning a pink flamingo. I took a cautious step and heard a crunch. I looked down and saw a crushed envelope, brittle with age. It was addressed to the HOA but had never been mailed. That's when I noticed the boxes, dozens of them, stacked in the far corner, hidden behind a thick tarp. Curiosity is a funny thing. I didn't come here to investigate anything. I came to dig away around a blocked garage. But now, with the tarp in my hands, something in me shifted. I pulled it back, revealing dusty banker's boxes labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. HOA records, violation logs, financial statements. Some were sealed with red duct tape. Others bulged with manila folders and legal pads. It looked less like organized records and more like someone had dumped the inner workings of the HOA into her basement and never looked back. I opened the first box and pulled out a file. Inside were copies of violation letters, some real, some I'd never heard about. A few were for things that weren't even in the HOA rulebook. One neighbor had been fined for unauthorized wind chimes, another for excessive bird activity. The letters were typed, signed, and had forged board member approvals. I flipped through 5 more folders. The pattern was obvious. Eleanor had created her own mini-kingdom, issuing fines at random and collecting the fees directly. At the bottom of one box was a ledger, old school, handwritten columns of names, dates, amounts. Some matched up with known HOA fees, but others were far higher, random charges labeled noise pollution review or seasonal yard audit. I recognized some of the names, people who moved out mysteriously. One guy across the street had vanished overnight after Eleanor posted a foreclosure notice on his door. At the time, I thought it was just bad luck. Now, I wasn't so sure. I heard a loud thump from above and froze. I killed my flashlight and crouched, heart pounding in the darkness. Eleanor was walking directly above me. I could hear her humming something cheerful and totally inappropriate for a person hiding financial crimes in their crawl space. She stopped. I stopped breathing. After a moment, her footsteps moved away. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared move again. I took pictures of everything. Ledgers, letters, even the creepy dolls in the corner that I sincerely hoped weren't part of some HOA-approved holiday display. I backed out of the crawl space and returned to my tunnel, sealing the opening with the broken slab and covering the tunnel's entrance with loose dirt. I had enough evidence to blow Eleanor's operation sky high, but I knew I had to be careful. If I acted too fast, she'd bury it, figuratively and literally. Back in the shed, I reviewed the photos on my phone and realized the scope of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about her parking across my garage or her fake construction zone. Eleanor had turned the HOA into her own criminal empire. She forged fines, collected cash, and manipulated the rules to crush anyone who got in her way. And worst of all, no one questioned it. People just paid. They feared her. She'd created a system where resistance felt impossible. Until now. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, staring at the ceiling and wondering how far I should take this. Blowing the whistle could get me arrested for trespassing. Staying silent meant letting her continue. And then a third thought crept in. What if I didn't just expose her? What if I turned her own system against her? After all, I now had access to her most vulnerable spot, a secret tunnel under her house, a tunnel she didn't even know existed. The war had just escalated, and the battlefield was now beneath her floorboards. The tunnel became more than a project. It became an obsession. While the world above me marched on with its morning dog walks and carefully manicured lawns, I was crawling under Eleanor's house like a mole on a mission. My wife thought I was working overtime on a landscaping hobby, and I kept the kids away by telling them I was building a surprise fort, technically not a lie. Every night after dinner, after the dishes were done and bedtime stories were read, I would slip out to the shed, climb into the tunnel, and disappear into the underbelly of suburban tyranny. Down there, I wasn't just avoiding a blocked garage anymore. I was digging into something deeper, something that felt rotten at its core. I had seen those files under Eleanor's house, and they weren't just evidence of shady HOA practices. They were a roadmap to her entire scheme. She had created fake violations, invented bogus fines, and forged the signatures of people who didn't even live in the neighborhood anymore. What really chilled me were the black folders, each labeled with a neighbor's name. I recognized most of them. People who had been mysteriously quiet, oddly obedient, or who had moved out without a word. One folder stood out. It had the name of Mr. Davies, the quiet old man who lived 2 houses down from me. He was the kind of guy who waved, but never talked much. His folder contained photos, actual surveillance shots of him coming and going, walking his dog, even picking up packages. Attached was a typed list of violations that included things like failure to mulch and prolonged curtain closure. That last one made no sense, but then I found a sticky note with a scribbled message, "Push hard. Davies resisted dues." That was the moment I realized Eleanor wasn't just controlling the HOA. She was actively watching people, monitoring them, using fear and fines to control them. I started cataloging everything. I created a folder on an encrypted flash drive and backed it up to an anonymous cloud. I knew if Eleanor ever suspected what I was doing, she'd unleash a storm of legal fire on me. I wasn't just digging under her house. I was digging up her secrets, and those secrets were ugly. I began spending more time inside the crawl space, reinforcing the entry point, laying down boards to muffle my steps. I even installed a small battery-powered light so I could read the files more clearly. Every night, I found something new. A ledger entry that didn't make sense, a check photocopy with mismatched signatures, a threatening letter never mailed but clearly intended. And then came the night I discovered the safe. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the farthest corner of the crawl space. I nearly missed it, but my flashlight flickered against a strip of polished metal. I pried the board up slowly, and there it was, an old steel safe, dusty and dented, but clearly functional. I knew I couldn't break into it without tools or making noise, so I snapped pictures of the serial number and markings. I didn't know what was inside, but something about the way it was hidden told me this wasn't just where Eleanor kept her birth certificate. This was where she kept the stuff that could ruin her. Around this time, I started noticing small changes in Eleanor's behavior. She was no longer her overly smug, strutting self. She walked faster. She looked over her shoulder more. I saw her out front one afternoon, speaking in hushed tones with a man in a suit. Not a neighbor, not a contractor. He had the stiff, awkward look of a lawyer. My tunnel must have disturbed something. Maybe she noticed the cold draft from the crawl space. Maybe she heard something one night. Either way, she was on edge, and that made her dangerous. I knew I had to move fast. I started making return trips during the day while Eleanor was at work. I carefully timed her schedule, watched from my upstairs window, waited for her car to pull out, and then made my move. Each time I uncovered more. Contracts with fake board member names, scans of driver's licenses from former residents, even an email draft where she threatened to report someone's dog as dangerous if they didn't withdraw a complaint. She never sent it, but just seeing it typed out gave me goosebumps. It was proof of intent. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she had no problem using fear to get what she wanted. One afternoon, during one of my secret expeditions, I nearly got caught. I was in the tunnel when I heard footsteps above me, heavy, deliberate. Then a voice. Eleanor was talking on the phone. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard bits and pieces. That's been too quiet. I don't trust it. Maybe I should install cameras. My stomach dropped. If she put up security, the game was over. I waited in silence for almost an hour before I dared crawl back out. My clothes were soaked with sweat, not just from the heat, but from the growing realization that I was playing with fire. But instead of backing off, I doubled down. I couldn't stop now. I was too deep, literally and figuratively. That night, I returned with a tiny wireless camera I'd ordered online. It was disguised as a smoke detector, battery-operated and Wi-Fi enabled. I planted it in a dark corner of the crawl space, pointed toward the safe. I didn't know what I was hoping to catch. Maybe Eleanor accessing it, maybe just looking panicked. Either way, I needed leverage. I needed her to slip up. And she did. The very next day, I got an alert from the camera feed. Eleanor had entered the crawl space. She was carrying a duffel bag. I watched, heart pounding, as she opened the safe and pulled out envelopes, thick ones. She stuffed them in the bag without counting. Cash, it had to be. She zipped the bag and muttered something I couldn't hear, then crawled out again. She didn't even lock the safe afterward, as if she was in a rush. Something was happening. She was preparing to bolt. The camera recorded everything. I downloaded the footage, backed it up, and immediately contacted someone I never thought I'd need. My cousin Leo, a freelance reporter with a grudge against HOAs after his own nightmare in a different state. I told him everything. I sent him the files, the video, the photos. He didn't even blink. "I've been waiting for a story like this," he said. "Give me 48 hours. Eleanor had no idea the walls were closing in. She went about her day, sipping lemonade, barking at neighbors about improperly positioned garden gnomes. But her empire was cracking, and I was the one wielding the sledgehammer from below. I didn't know what would happen next, if she'd find out, if she'd run, or if she'd try to fight back. But I knew one thing for certain. The tunnel wasn't just my escape route anymore. It was the front line of a quiet war, and I was done playing nice. Eleanor didn't see it coming. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood like a petty queen, handing out fake violations like Halloween candy and threatening people into submission with her laminated HOA handbook. But she had made one mistake. She picked the wrong garage to block. Now, she was moving through her days completely unaware that her kingdom was about to collapse from the ground up, literally. I had everything I needed. The files, the ledgers, the video of her stuffing that duffel bag full of cash in the crawl space. But going public wasn't just about hitting send. I had to be smart. If I made a mistake, she'd wriggle out of it with one of her fake permits and legal loopholes. Or worse, she'd pin it all on me. So I decided to deliver my payload the same way I dug my tunnel, quietly, strategically, and with a whole lot of satisfaction. The first move was anonymous tips. I used a burner email and sent a package of digital files to the local news, the city council, and the county inspector's office. I made sure each email was short, polite, and loaded with enough evidence to raise eyebrows. No accusations, Just a simple note. Concerned neighbor. Please review. I didn't sign it, didn't trace it back to my name, but I made sure it was loud enough to spark curiosity and heavy enough to start a fire. Then came the real power play. I printed hard copies of the most damning documents and dropped them off, one by one, in the mailboxes of the neighbors Eleanor had bullied the most. Mr. Davies got one. So did the woman who had been fined for putting sunflowers in her front yard. I knew once the news started to spread, it would do what fire always does. It would consume everything in its path. And Eleanor? She was dry kindling. The first reaction came sooner than I expected. 2 days after the tip-offs, a news van rolled down the street. At first, I thought they were just filming a puff piece about community gardens or some other suburban nonsense. But then the reporter stepped out, holding one of the very photos I had sent, Eleanor's forged ledger. She walked straight up to Eleanor's house and knocked. Eleanor didn't open the door. She peeked through the blinds, and I watched from my upstairs window as her face turned the same color as expired mayonnaise. Her little empire wasn't just cracking, it was starting to crumble. The next few days were chaos in slow motion. An official city vehicle showed up with a clipboard and a badge. Then 2 more. Eleanor started pacing her lawn like a guard dog, yelling into her phone, snapping at the mailman, and slamming her trash cans for no reason at all. Her usual HOA patrols stopped. Her smug little walks with her coffee mug were replaced by frantic calls and whispering in her driveway. People noticed. They started whispering too. For the first time, Eleanor wasn't the hunter, she was the prey. But it wasn't over, not even close. Because Eleanor did what Eleanor always does when cornered. She lashed out. One morning, I woke up to find a brand new violation slip taped to my door. This one accused me of unauthorized nocturnal activity and unregistered structural modifications. I actually laughed. She was throwing made-up charges like darts in the dark, hoping one would stick. But she wasn't guessing. She suspected. Maybe she heard something under her house. Maybe she'd seen disturbed soil near the shed. Maybe she just had a gut feeling. Either way, I had to move faster. I geared up that night with a backpack, gloves, and a new trail camera to install deeper in the crawl space. I planned to get more footage, especially of the safe, now that she'd left it unlocked in her panic. But just as I opened the trap door into my tunnel, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Fresh footprints in the shed. Not mine. Smaller. Eleanor's dog? A neighbor? Or worse, Eleanor herself? I dropped into the tunnel and moved fast. The air felt heavier, like the dirt knew something I didn't. When I reached the crawl space, I stopped cold. The safe was gone. Not opened, not emptied, gone. The boards it sat on were ripped up, splinters everywhere, like someone had yanked it out in a frenzy. My camera in the corner was cracked and dangling. She had found it. She knew someone had been watching, and now she was trying to erase the evidence. I nearly turned back, but then I noticed something strange in the spot where the safe had been. There was a shallow hole, and in that hole, wedged between 2 beams, was a folded piece of paper. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a handwritten note, barely legible, written in frantic pen strokes. It read, "If you're reading this, she's watching all of us. It's not just HOA money. It's everything." There was no signature, just a scroll at the bottom that looked like a half-erased name. It wasn't Eleanor's handwriting. Someone else had written this, someone who had been in here before me. I crawled out fast, heart pounding, and ran the note through every trick I had. Watermark checks, ink aging, even handwriting analysis apps. It didn't give me a name, but it confirmed my worst suspicion. Eleanor hadn't just created a fake HOA dictatorship for money. She was hiding something else, something bigger. The tunnel was just a door. What lay behind it was darker than I thought. The next morning, I played it cool. I waved to Eleanor as she was watering her lawn like nothing had happened. She narrowed her eyes and looked at me for a second too long. That was the moment I knew for sure. She knew it was me. And now we were in a quiet suburban Cold War. I wasn't just some annoying neighbor anymore. I was a threat, and she was gearing up for war. The final straw came later that day. I checked my backyard security feed and found a new video alert. At 3:17 a.m., someone had stepped into my yard. Not a raccoon, not a stray cat. A person, short, fast, wearing dark clothes. They stayed near the shed for less than 30 seconds, then vanished. No flashlight, no sound, just a shadow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat across my lap and every light off, not because I thought she'd attack, but because I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. This wasn't about HOA violations anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about control. Eleanor had built a web, and I was tearing it apart thread by thread. The next phase had to be bold. No more sneaking, no more tunnel digging. It was time for Eleanor to face the music. I contacted the city again. I called the press. I even filed an anonymous request to have the HOA reviewed by a state compliance agency. The final piece? I submitted a sealed envelope to the neighborhood board with copies of every document I had, addressed to every resident who's ever been bullied. Eleanor could try to hide the safe, she could yank out the camera, but she couldn't dig herself out of the hole she'd created. That was my job, and I had already finished the tunnel. It all came crashing down faster than I ever imagined. 1 week after I sent out the final wave of documents and footage, the entire neighborhood buzzed like a kicked beehive. Lawn chairs appeared on porches that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Neighbors whispered in driveways, eyebrows raised, eyes darting toward Eleanor's house like it was some haunted mansion about to implode. The atmosphere was tense, electric, like everyone could feel something big was about to happen. And then it did. On a bright Wednesday morning, when birds were chirping and sprinklers were misting the sidewalks, 3 police cruisers, a city inspector van, and 2 news trucks rolled up our street. No sirens, no drama, just the quiet, determined kind of arrival that meant this wasn't a friendly visit. Eleanor came out onto her porch, confused at first, then furious. I watched from behind my window blinds as she started yelling before anyone even said a word, arms flailing, mouth going a mile a minute, demanding to see a warrant, accusing the officers of harassment, and claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign. It was beautiful, a performance worthy of an award. But it didn't matter. The officer in charge calmly handed her a folded stack of papers. I couldn't hear what was said, but the way Eleanor's shoulders stiffened told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a request. This was a reckoning. She tried to slam her door, but they followed her inside. Moments later, they escorted her back out. No cuffs yet, but definitely not of her own free will. The reporters swarmed her like moths to a flame, flashing cameras and shouting questions. I recorded the whole thing from my upstairs window, just for myself, just to have it. The woman who once fined me for leaving a garden hose on my lawn for too long was now getting grilled about embezzlement, fraud, and illegal surveillance. I couldn't stop smiling. Over the next few days, the neighborhood transformed. It was like someone had lifted a heavy weight off everyone's chest. People who had never so much as nodded at me were suddenly bringing over cookies, thanking me for whatever it was you did. I didn't confirm anything. I just smiled and said, sometimes the dirt reveals the truth. It became a bit of an inside joke between me and a few neighbors who knew something shady had been going on, but never had the nerve or the evidence to fight it. The power Eleanor held over the neighborhood dissolved almost overnight. Her name became a punchline, a cautionary tale, a whispered legend passed around barbecues and front porch gossip circles. The best part was watching the HOA unravel. Turns out Eleanor had filed dozens of false reports, forged documents, and deposited thousands of dollars in fines into a personal account cleverly named HOA Reserve Fund. Once the city auditors got a look at the financials, it was game over. The board was dismantled, new elections were ordered, and residents were told they would receive refunds or credits for bogus fees. There was even talk of turning the HOA over to an independent management company, one that didn't include tyrants with clipboards and bad attitudes. But Eleanor wasn't done yet. Even after being exposed, she fought like a cornered animal. She claimed the documents were fake, the tunnel was a setup, the video of her loading cash into the duffel bag was deep fake propaganda. She tried every excuse in the book. None of it stuck. Once they started cross-referencing her forged violations with real city code, it was obvious how much she had fabricated. Her legal team tried to suppress the tunnel footage, but too many people had already seen it. The video of her crawling into her crawl space, sweating and panicked, pulling bundles of money from the safe, and muttering to herself about people needing to learn their place was already in circulation. It didn't matter how many cease and desist letters her lawyers sent out. The story was alive. Eventually, the legal pressure cracked her. She accepted a plea deal to avoid prison, but it cost her everything: her house, her position, her reputation. She moved out under cover of night, her once pristine SUV loaded with cardboard boxes and a garden gnome that had somehow survived the chaos. No one waved. No one said goodbye. The silence as she drove away was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The tunnel, of course, became neighborhood legend. It didn't stay secret for long. Word got around. A few curious teenagers tried to find the entrance, but I'd already sealed it up, filled it with cement, and laid fresh grass over the shed floor. I didn't want anyone getting hurt or getting any ideas. Still, the idea of it captured people's imagination. Every so often, someone would nudge me and say, "Still got that escape route under there?" I'd wink, shake my head, and leave them guessing. Life returned to normal in the best way possible. The new HOA board was made up of actual neighbors, not mini dictators. Rules were simplified, fines were reasonable. People started planting flowers without fear. Kids rode bikes without being chased down for not wearing helmets approved by the HOA handbook. The neighborhood felt human again, lived in, real. And for once, I felt like I belonged. But just when I thought it was all over, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just a folded piece of thick paper tucked inside like it had been hand-delivered. I opened it, curious. Inside was a single sentence typed in block letters. "You think Eleanor was bad? Wait till you meet her sister." Beneath that, a second line, handwritten in faint ink. She just inherited the house. I stood on my porch, letter in hand, staring across the street. Eleanor's house was dark, but not empty. The lawn was freshly cut. The porch light flickered on and off like someone inside was checking bulbs. The curtains were drawn, but one was slightly open, just enough for someone to peek through. I couldn't see a face, but I felt it, that strange chill down your spine when someone's watching you and wants you to know it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of it all. After everything, the tunnel, the files, the collapse of the HOA, I was right back where I started, standing in front of my garage, staring at the house next door, wondering what kind of neighbor had just moved in. But this time, I wasn't afraid, because I knew the layout beneath the ground. I knew where the cracks were, where the secrets lived. And if her sister was anything like Eleanor, well, I had a head start. The war might have ended, but the battlefield was still there. And I wasn't just a suburban dad with a grudge anymore. I was the man who built a tunnel under tyranny and lived to tell the tale. Let them come. I've got shovels.